com a nossa convidada, MARIACHIARA Esposito, que é secretária da União Europeia ao nível da cultura e do ambiente. Portanto, é uma excelente oportunidade, dentro do contexto do Landscape Together e dos nossos parceiros, de apresentar-nos novas formas de desenvolver projetos na área das artes, da cultura e do desenvolvimento da paisagem. Acho que o próprio título escolhido para esta apresentação, criar, criar um ambiente como uma obra de arte coletiva, é muito sugestivo do que é este projeto e do que tem sido feito durante a Copisada Arts Fest. So the title of this presentation is Creating Environment, Collective Artwork, European Policies to Support the Reposition of the Cultural Sector. And we have invited MARIACHIARA Esposito, second national expert at the European Commission, DGAC, at the Unity of Cultural Policy, and she also led the Open Method Coordination Group on the cultural dimension of sustainable development theme. So MARIACHIARA is also responsible for the Voices of Cultural platform dedicated to the reposition of cultural and creative sectors. We have also with us to this talk Laura Castro, researcher, art critic, and teacher that have been with us since the beginning of the previous of, of this project, and also Adriano Gonçalves from the University of Coimbra, our partner of Landscape Together in the research area. So we are here near Moongate. Is artwork beginning in the middle of the Pisada Fest with this intensive program in the territory of a group of itinerant festival in this open air territory. So I'm going to give the word to MARIACHIARA, so she presents us some ideas of how to develop projects in these areas with networks and projects with many partners. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Marta. Thank you for being here. It's a pleasure for me, and I'm really sorry not to be able to speak Portuguese, but I will do my best for coming next time with those new skills to be in the condition not to speak only English. So it's the first objective for me to come again. I really wish to thank Marta for this invitation, which, as you can probably imagine, puts me in a very different context than the usual one where I'm used to give these presentations. So I really hope this will be not too boring for you, not too far from your daily work, and I'll do my best to try and condense and maybe summarize some of the slides to be faster. Let me also congratulate the project, the Landscape Together Consortium and Partnership, which won this very competitive opportunity that the European Commission launches regularly for culture and creative sectors. And I have to say that it's really consistent with some of the principles that we promote more and more for culture to be connected to landscape, environment, and green issues. I'm not sure. Pode fazer tudo. So, what do we do at the European Commission, and especially why did Marta invite me? To try explain in brief why this project is very in line with the new principles and opportunities that the European Union has increasingly dedicated to culture in its capacity to meet what we establish at the level of the Council, the Commission, Member States, all together in what we call the competences of the European Union, which are not very strong in the field of culture. So what is really possible for the Commission to do? The Commission cannot legislate on culture, it cannot regulate the cultural sectors because it's a national competence, but it can support, coordinate, and encourage actions of member states, of regions, of territories to apply for these grants and to apply for the initiatives that are aimed to this role that we have linked to what the treaty establishes. So the main objective for us in culture is to encourage preservation and promotion of European cultural heritage, but also to help all organizations in Europe to coordinate programs and policies towards common goals that facilitate cooperation and that include more and more authorities from the ground. So this project is really the demonstration that there can be successful ways to cooperate that Europe can support and promote. I will be very quick here. There is a framework that defines this priority in more precise details. And recently, we have agreed at European level on establishing a work program that includes the role of culture for the planet and the power of culture to act and to stimulate the green transition, focusing also on challenges that have been more and more important in the recent years, like the energy crisis, everything that creates challenges for cultural organizations and practitioners that have to face also greening and environmental related difficulties and have to accompany these rules that also have an impact on cultural organizations in the Green Deal, for example, and in the energy-related directives, and on the other side can use the power of culture to help facing this transition and this new rules. And one of our most recent efforts and studies was done under what we call the structured dialogue with civil society, which is a group of cultural organizations that every 2 years meet in Brussels and they address one of the topics that we decide is more important for culture. And the last one was focusing on the role of culture and creative sectors to drive the green transition and be protagonists of facing the energy crisis. So what did this organization do? They produced a report and they had a dialogue between experts from civil society that have the capacity to influence and especially to inspire the decisions that the European Commission has to take based on their experience on the ground. So, for example, in your roles of experts of either universities or local communities or private companies, when there are these codes that the European Union launches to put together groups of experts, you can also apply to bring your expertise and be part of this structured dialogue in the cultural sector. This took place more or less 1 year ago, and it was a preparatory action to other groups that we have to mobilize also from the national authorities. And these groups are those that sit in the committees that write the work programs and grants to which you apply for projects like the one which you have been funding. So, for example, some of these ideas and recommendations that the experts suggested are suggesting ways to change Creative Europe criteria for supporting culture in a way that can be more able to adapt to the environmental rules, or also to select projects more and more based on environmental criteria. So it's a process that takes place in these different groups of either civil society representatives or authorities from member states, and they act to lobby, to advocate for changing the ways cultural sectors can influence other policies such as energy, environment, the Green Deal. You can see here there are three main areas of suggestions, some of which have been more and more seriously being taken on board by the programs of the EU, like Creative Europe, Horizon Europe, and more will also read this report to see what could be the ways to change evaluation criteria, for example, incorporating the expertise of cultural industries in committees that have to select the projects, or other ideas like, for example, creating platforms where all the green-related projects developed by cultural communities in Europe can be visible in one common website or in one common place that can inform the different areas of Europe that want to be more and more active in this field. So this is just one example of the most strategic work that informs our policies. And what is the possible result of this process? One of the results was that, for example, Creative Europe has been integrating expertise used for suggesting this way of integrating environmental concerns for culture. And a new study has been published which identifies many good practices that exist in Europe, where cultural sectors have been able to look at heritage assets or creativity or arts or other practices to support other policies for the environment, or for example, to tackle climate change. So the way of using this study is now discussed in the Commission to inform the future goals of Creative Europe. So Creative Europe, which is the most important program that you also use for your Landscape Together consortium, will integrate new criteria for evaluating the projects that have to comply with rules where, for example, can include strategies where cultural practitioners are able, for example, to measure carbon emissions or to consider energy efficiency principles when refurbishing a museum or when restoring a building, but also more and more focusing on intangible aspects of culture. So there are a lot of indicators that you can find in this study that also have to do with creativity that can be expressed through cooperation between artists and museum managers, and guides of practices that you can replicate in projects also at local level. You see that there are categories of examples of the reflections that this study has identified, where you can apply this new environmental oriented methods in culture. Examples range from the way you organize workshops to the way you do training programs that can be more environmental friendly, to the way you can, for example, have experts in conferences that are more careful to the way they invest in mobility. So a lot of aspects that use culture to support a way of living which is more careful to the environment, but which is also changing the behavior of people, being more respectful and more capable of thinking how to manage cultural assets and how to manage also intangible assets like landscapes or projects that put together um, institutions and communities working in common, like for example you do in your partnership. Another aspect of this way of working now is to do brainstorming labs where before the next step of the project is agreed, a number of criteria have to be respected by all those that we organize, let's say the conference at the next level, and the publication of the event, for example, has to mention all the way the project has been able to save in terms of energy efficiency in an event or in a building or in a place which is used with a way of saving um, resources for the environment. And the most important element that is already being used by Creative Europe, but this is more in the media sector, is the called carbon calculator. So the media sub-program has used and has described examples of how to calculate carbon emissions while you develop a certain project. So link the examples I just told you, you can be inspired by what, for example, organizations in the film industry or audiovisual projects using these carbon calculators have together and collected data that can be helpful to use once you want to implement a calculator also in a cultural project. And this is an example of what you should consider also to decide if it's feasible and if it's pertinent for a cultural project to have this approach, because not necessarily what you can use in audiovisual is appropriate for another sector. But it's inspiring for developing a carbon calculator which is specific, for example, for theater or for performing arts or crafts or other cultural fields in the future of creative work. To give you another example of an initiative which is changing a bit the philosophical approach and also the mindset of applicants, but also very much of, let's say, institutions that set up programs for funding. I gave you the example of the new European Bauhaus that you might have heard either from historical knowledge of the previous movement of the Bauhaus, which was based on architectures and designers working together for changing the places and the buildings look out. And now at European level, this movement attributes full importance to three main aspects. Changing the places, so very consistent with what you're doing with landscapes together, enabling the environment for creating innovation. So everything that has to do, for example, with involving communities, local authorities and players that are helping innovative ways of doing policies on the ground. And as I said before, also involving citizens. So what has to do with behaviors and lifestyles. Yeah, so the idea of this initiative is to be integrated in all funding instruments, not only for culture, but to use the cultural perspective to support this way of designing the grants and the programs that will be also targeted to the culture and creative sector. And you see that there are different strengths. The Bauhaus has been organized in the European Commission. For example, there is a whole way of looking at how revitalizing neighborhoods can be a source of change also in EU approaches for dedicating funds to different sectors. And also ways to, as I said before, stimulate creativity not only in project applicants but also in citizens and in policy decision makers. There are also different, let's say, tools that you can connect to. to become part of this movement and to be active at European level, also to be, for example, able to facilitate a workshop that has the label linked to the new European Bauhaus. And you can be of course, more and more updated on this if you look at the funding that are part of our programs and that have the reference to the new European Bauhaus. It can be to become part of the community, or it can be to establish guidelines and local levels that attribute standards to projects that are inspired by the new European Bauhaus, or it could be about piloting and experimenting through research and innovation methodologies, tests, and collaborations on the ground. There are 6 main projects that have been funded with this view in mind, to give examples of how communities in Europe are using the vision of the Bauhaus to demonstrate successful ways of impacting on place-based new creation of awareness for this idea of inclusion, well-being, sustainability through cultural activities and through artistic collaboration. And this is a list of these projects that are widespread in different territories of Europe. And you can see each of them has a different focus, has a specific angle. For example, one is very focused on crafts. Another one, like Desire, is very similar to your notion of changing the connection between urban spaces and rural landscapes. And in fact, I made a focus specifically on this one because it's really oriented on the idea of also looking at the economy in a different way, so the idea of circular economy, and very much able to use design methods. And this is a new trend because design as a discipline and also as a sector will be more and more part of calls for proposals under European programs. And as I said before, there are different ways for you to think how you can become a partner of this movement, either by trying to apply for one of the codes that has New European Bauhaus as a target, as a label, or become part of a community that regularly stays in touch and nurtures also ideas for Europe to give examples to other territories. There are 2 main groups. One is called the Friends group, and the other one is called Lab. And here you have the references, because there are regularly during the year also courses that are not distributing resources but are asking people to expose their projects and to be identified as pioneers of these movements. And this creates a lot of opportunities for networking and for facilitating collaborations, because, for example, all those that have entered the community or the group of friends are more protagonists of workshops that are organized in Brussels when there is the Bauhaus Festival. You know, if you have been part of the community and are active at local level on this vision, when the European Commission has to organize a conference and needs experts, or when there is the festival, when there is a brainstorming activity on net, it's easier to be contacted or to be mobilized because of your example. So it's a two-way process, not necessarily looking for funds, but also looking for a networking opportunity, which is really a keyword at European level. And speaking of keywords, I just want to show you this sentence that we always remind to our partners from the President of the European Commission, that has really insisted a lot for this movement of Bauhaus as a way to give a soul to the Green Deal. And she has highlighted that this happened over the last years thanks to the explosion of creativity that this inspirational movement has mobilized as energies and forces in Europe from creators and cultural operational organizations. And as I was telling you before, there are upcoming new funds that will be more and more targeting this house, in particular in Horizon Europe. Here it was just to give you another couple of examples of projects that are being already giving results. So this is also more advanced, and it's been funded under another initiative connected to Creative Europe, which was called Cultural Heritage in Action. It was a peer learning program where precisely cities and regions could apply to be funded for organizing exchanges, peer exchanges between territories that face similar challenges, but that address those challenges with different approaches. So also very much in the spirit of your partnership. And here you have, I think, two of the most interesting examples that we selected. One was on the so-called adaptive reuse of heritage buildings, which is another trend that we support more and more. So indeed, instead of spending resources and policies for demolishing buildings and restart a different activity, there is evidence that heritage can be preserved even by restoring with the attention to the materials and to the methods to use criteria for environment, and this is less cost effective, it is more cost effective than demolition. So restoring and changing the use of materials, in particular changing the destination of an ancient building that is not in use anymore, is very, very widespread as a practice to receive also private support, because partners and sponsors are more and more in need, for example, to reuse what has been considered industrial heritage in cities. And this was done in particular by the city of Berlin, that created a park in an area which was completely industrial, but which was classified as heritage. So it's the concept of circular economy and adaptive reuse of heritage in different ways, where you can also contribute to stimulating an environmental approach. And this discussion on greening, culture, and creativity is also very much felt in the international dimension, in the debate that takes place after Mondjakult, which was a very important conference where UNESCO promoted the idea of the cultural dimension of sustainable development. And the Commission also helped UNESCO to advocate for this, and we are using one of our former reports to demonstrate how nature and humans are also connected in ways that can be translated through cultural activities for tackling climate change and sustainable development in all the dimensions. So not only the environmental one, but also the social, the economic one. So all the transformations that culture can bring. And a very concrete step and result of this event was a request to include in the new agenda for sustainable development post 2030 a dedicated goal for culture, which, if it becomes part of the agenda, will oblige cultural authorities to measure the impacts of culture on sustainable development. So it's not only a debate, but it's really something that can have a concrete effect. And speaking of concrete initiatives, this is a reference to the program on which I work more intensely in our team, which is the program for research and innovation, where there is a strong budget for culture and cultural heritage since the beginning in 2021, which will continue until 2027, and has reflected also on how culture and cultural heritage can be drivers of climate responses and climate action. And there was a consultation of citizens and organizations in all Europe that gave an answer about what are the main challenges for research that culture and cultural heritage can address. And the answer was climate change is in position number one. So now the challenge for the Commission is how to use culture and cultural heritage to invest in research, not only to preserve and to protect heritage against the risk of climate impact, but also to use them as a potential to invest in climate responses. So there is a partnership that will be funded between the Commission and the national authorities in Europe to put together resources and give universities in the next 7 years new possibilities to create programs for researchers and for museums, cultural organizations, where all the research programs should focus on this area. So this is also an upcoming call, but it will be very, very broad. We will put together much more resources than Creative Europe, because here the pocket of resources is much bigger. And it will be based on a number of evidences that were also transmitted by the work that we did in culture, in the cultural field. So these groups I was mentioning before are helpful in this way because they create a momentum and an awareness, and they raise the attention of institutions towards the role that culture is having also as part of the solution against the climate challenges, and not only as a recipient of climate-oriented mitigation and adaptation. So this is a co-funded envisaged partnership. Will be part of this cluster in Horizon Europe, which is the famous cluster dedicated to culture, creativity, inclusive society. And this cluster is a list of research actions that every year, every 2 years, mobilize resources for universities and institutions from the cultural sector to work together on different topics. So climate change will be the priority, but there will also be many other topics connected to green, to sustainability, to innovation, to inclusion. So for giving culture and the cultural sector all its power to also influence research strategies. And this final slide is just, let's say, a way for you to have a reference to a guide, an interactive guide that we have published on our website, where you can interconnect the funds and the opportunities existing in different programs. So, for example, I mentioned Horizon Europe and Creative Europe, but there are also other programs like Erasmus Plus or programs for citizenship and values, programs for digitalizing cultural assets. And through this guide, which is available online in all European languages, you can find on one side examples of open calls to which you can apply, or examples of funded projects in different sectors where culture was used and supported through one of the European instruments. And also important for you to know that when you go in this kind of instruments, it's useful to see, like you certainly know, in Creative Europe there is a database of applicants that did projects in the past. Those are very important for finding partners. So sometimes, not only looking for the next level of call for an opportunity you want to answer to, but also to look at those successful projects where you could reach out to a partner that was targeting maybe an issue that is similar to what you want to address. It's very useful to look into this guide because you have the evidence and you have all the contact details, all the references. So it was a huge work in the online domain that we need to collect the data that applicants should use and are using more and more to see how opportunities are available in different areas of policies, and they include culture in a horizontal way, not only in a very direct way. So this was really an overview of many, many different things. And of course, I'm sure you still have a lot of doubts and question of how to use these things. But I hope that at least we can give an inspiration and especially confirm that we are trying to consolidate this connection between culture and environment and landscape and stimulating greening approaches because it's really the priority of all the programs, and it's also a way to look at culture as a living asset. So it's really not only thinking, the past, the tradition, or the heritage to preserve, but is about the heritage to make alive and to use for mobilizing communities and ways of reconnecting people to their places. So it's really at the heart of the challenge that we try to push through. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Luciana. Okay, so now as we very clear, we can talk very relaxed. Uh, uh, yes, okay. So you can continue talking, and you can and think about how to develop uh, these kind of projects related culture and environment. So Laura and Medina, I will ask you to kick off. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your clear presentation, and there are many aspects that resonate in our heads while you were speaking. Um, I think it was really important to know the priorities, but also the methodology that is followed to define those priorities. That was really interesting, that sometimes we forget that as citizens we can participate more through organizations and associations or whatever in those definitions. It was very interesting. I, I perhaps would ask a question that, as you gave examples of projects, um, how many of, and you have a lot of experience in European funding, um, how many of these projects uh, leave a legacy, a true legacy that transforms people's lives in cities, places, whatever? Because we are, I think, in each country in Europe, we are very used to use the foundings in cycles of some certain periods of time, and everything works while there is funding, European funding. But once it's over, many of these projects, we know that are very difficult to keep going, working on them and managing them, etc. What do you think is the percentage of projects that really leave a legacy and are still working after the funding is gone?
Well, thank you, Michelle, for your very, very inspiring invitation. Uh, and let me be influenced by the place where we are. Because of this, because you named several times your heritage issue. And it would be nice that this heritage issue is not another issue to create imbalances or to reinforce imbalances. Why we is that usually we associate heritage to the urban landscapes. And some regions are not that rich on fundamental heritage, so to speak. Uh, that this region, this interior region, is very rich in heritage, but it requires large and elastic understanding of heritage. Uh, I'm not going to give a class, but heritage is not a thing. You cannot touch on heritage. Heritage is the meaning, the significance of that we society attribute to things, and we cannot reuse heritage. We just can't enrich heritage. Heritage is one thing, heritage assets is another thing. Okay? I know it's complex, but this understanding of heritage makes me able to say that this region is very rich in heritage, and heritage that we cannot lose because it's about knowledge, traditions, and vernacular architecture, mainly, not monumental architecture. So I know this is a problem that we, the potential researchers to apply these projects, I know that we are the ones who have to deal with this, but it would be nice that also the European Union be sensitive to these different understandings of heritage.
Do we also want to have more questions now and I give her answers, or I answer this too? Okay. Okay. Then I will, if you don't mind, I will start with this question. They're both very challenging, but yeah, indeed, indeed. But I need probably, and I thank you for this question because I didn't have probably enough time or means to go more in depth on this notion. But what I really wanted to stress is that at the European Union level, there is more and more this understanding. And I can give you a very precise reference. In all our strategies and programs and funding instruments, we use the UNESCO definition of heritage, which is the broadest one in terms of codification, although we know that it has still one limitation because it doesn't include all the elements of intangible heritage, but it is the way for us to broaden what was so far misunderstood as heritage, as something that you can only touch or that deteriorates in time. So we are very aware of that, and we have mobilized a lot of resources, as I said, in the programs, but also a lot of exchanges to let this be understood also by the applicants and by some researchers that not necessarily have your view. So it also depends whom you talk to. And when I say we refer to UNESCO, it's because we need to have a codified reference, but we try to go beyond because in our, let's say, official documents, so for example, in this partnership that I mentioned, we make reference to the fact that heritage is also living heritage. So this goes a bit beyond the UNESCO definition because UNESCO definition speaks about traditions, other, let's say, intangible elements that are part of a non-concrete way of looking at a building or a monument. So it's also very specific on including practices, that are experienced. For example, it adds the element of landscape. So heritage is described as natural, material, immaterial, digital, and born digital. So it has many adjectives next to it. So it's really broad. But we try to go beyond because the limitation about intangible from UNESCO is because it doesn't include, for example, performances. For us, more and more at European level, music is part of intangible heritage. But there are a lot of problems when you use statistics or data definitions and codification, and it's also a contradiction between federal authorities and member states. So, for example, we struggle for having a common definition of culture and creativity in Eurostat because national institutes of statistics use different definitions and they measure culture and heritage in different ways. So this is a never-ending kind of dilemma and debate that we are trying to help at least addressing in ways that people can be more creative and can be more open philosophically but also pragmatically to cooperate on things that include these aspects for heritage. So not only monuments, but also landscape, sites, practices, traditions, and experiences. Crafts is also very important for us, but it's a specific sector. So in a way, you need to always define which part of heritage you are using for a certain goal or a certain program. And more from a personal note, I don't think that reuse is inappropriate because I think you can reuse heritage, but not always. So if you think of reusing a building that is abandoned, I think the notion is quite pertinent. But if you forget that heritage is not dying, because even in an abandoned building, there is still something that you should connect to when you restore or when you relaunch the way of populating that place, then you're right that maybe there are better words than reuse because they transmit more the idea that heritage is a living thing and it's also an atmosphere somehow that people have experienced and have to reappropriate to experience it again in a different way. So maybe not reuse, but re-experiencing would be more appropriate. But I totally agree on the notion that should be large. And going now to your question about percentage of projects and impact, I have to say that here at the table, like in many events, so independently from the fact that we're few people, also when we are more people, when we have these conferences, there is always a missing level of representation, which are the intermediary politicians. So either regional ones or national ones. Because to answer your question, I should go and talk to them, and I cannot give you a figure of one percentage because, first of all, I don't think it's existing. Yeah. So I don't want. There are some politicians that would just give you data because data are difficult to verify. So I could say more or less 20 or 30% have a life and a legacy. But I would lie because I don't have such data. And with the difficulty of measuring, I should give a data looking at different kinds of projects. So for sure, we have data to answer this question about Creative Europe, which is the program that we manage. But there are many other programs where culture, as I said, is funded. And I don't have a specific figure to say what is the legacy. So it's also a question of what do you want to measure for that legacy. So speaking of figures is a bit tricky. But what I can say quite scientifically is that the projects that have a legacy in principle, independently from the numbers, are those projects that are able to change their nature and their mission after the end of that project. So, if the partners are motivated enough to continue cooperating between them beyond the end of the project, because they didn't start the cooperation just because they received money and funds to do that activity for 5 years, then the project has a potential legacy for the future. And I can give you a very practical example. During the European Year of Cultural Heritage in 2018, there has been a consortium which has created a stable platform. It's in Italy and it's called Matera Hub. Matera Hub has become one of the most famous cultural platforms where creatives of many parts of Europe interact. And many people working in culture have heard about Matera Hub. So it means that they had some sort of legacy. But they completely changed their mission because the way they initially worked and they became famous in the original nature of their project was thanks to the fact that Matera was nominated European Capital of Culture in 2004, if I'm not wrong. So many years after, the effort and the engagement that in that particular city was mobilized together with communities, institutions, citizens, and other partners in Europe to make something different from that experience beyond the year of the European capital, made them upscale their capacity of developing new innovation through the experience that the city had had in the European year, which gave them, of course, resources to do things only for that year, but it became sustainable by itself and for themselves with the help of partners that were advocated because they did a huge job to reach out to private investors, to institutions beyond borders, to do other projects in other calls, like for example, projects that get funding like yours. Sometimes they can change their mission and think of another program in the future to apply for. And they can become a network or they can apply for research in Horizon. So if they think of new ways of cooperating, there is a much higher potential for living a life beyond the end of the project. And to have impact on the ground, so legacy in the community, there again, I think we should involve more the regional and national policymakers.
I don't know if anyone wants to put some questions. No? Okay.
Ao fim do dia, na Beira Baixa, de abril a outubro, há poucas coisas a saber tão bem como uma brisa fresca junto à água. E é até esse paraíso que nos leva a obra de arte Moongate.